It was supposed to be a simple family gathering. A birthday lunch for Eleanor, my mother-in-law, at the Hampshire Hall she'd rented just to feel important. The invitation had been extended to James, my husband of 5 years, with the casual addition of "and guest," rather than my name, Sarah. A small slight, but one in a long line of many. I spent the morning getting ready, selecting a modest navy dress that wouldn't draw attention, but still looked appropriate for the occasion. James had left 2 hours earlier, claiming he needed to help with decorations, though we both knew the real reason. His mother preferred to have him there without me for as long as possible. "It'll be fine," he'd said before leaving, kissing my forehead like I was a child needing reassurance. "Just come at noon, bring the gift, and try to smile." The drive to Hampshire Hall took longer than expected. Spring rain pattered against my windshield as I navigated the winding roads of Connecticut, rehearsing pleasant conversation starters in my head. 5 years of marriage to James had taught me to prepare for these interactions like business meetings, strategic, measured, with clear objectives. Today's objective: get through lunch without incident. The parking lot was already full when I arrived. Mercedes, BMWs, and Audis gleamed under the clearing sky. I parked my sensible Volvo at the far end and checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror. The pearl earrings James had given me for our anniversary caught the light. A small armor of sorts. Hampshire Hall stood imposing with its colonial facade and manicured grounds. Through the tall windows I could see figures moving about, champagne, flutes in hand. I took a deep breath, grabbed the carefully wrapped present from the passenger seat, and walked toward the entrance. The moment I pushed through the heavy oak doors, conversations dimmed. Heads turned not in welcome, but in surprise. I spotted Melissa, my sister-in-law, whispering something to her husband Thomas, both glancing my way with poorly concealed smirks. Cousin Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Uncle Peter frowned into his scotch. Scanned the room for James, finally finding him near the bar, deep in conversation with Eleanor's brother. He saw me but made no move to approach. Another small betrayal in our complicated marriage. Sarah. The way Eleanor said my name made it sound like an accusation. She approached with measured steps, clipboard in hand, her gray hair swept into an immaculate updo that matched her steel gray pantsuit. "I wasn't expecting you." "It's Eleanor's birthday," I said with a practiced smile. "I wouldn't miss it." Her thin lips tightened. "Well, there seems to be some confusion. You're not actually on the list." She turned the clipboard slightly, displaying the meticulously typed guest list, a power move designed to humiliate. The room had grown quieter. Even the servers had paused, sensing the tension. I felt 30 pairs of eyes on me, waiting for my reaction, perhaps hoping for a scene they could gossip about later. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising to my cheeks. "James mentioned it was family only, but I thought—" "James knows the arrangement," Eleanor cut in, her voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to hear. Perhaps there was a miscommunication. From across the room, James finally looked our way, his expression a mixture of guilt and resignation. He started to approach, but was intercepted by his uncle. Accidentally or by design, I couldn't tell. I could have argued, could have pointed out that I was family, could have created the scene everyone seemed to be anticipating. Instead, I simply nodded, placed the carefully wrapped crystal vase, one I'd spent weeks selecting, on the gift table. "Happy birthday, Eleanor," I said quietly. "I hope you enjoy your celebration." The sound of my heels against the marble floor echoed as I walked away, head high, shoulders back. The double doors felt heavier on my way out than they had coming in. Outside, the spring air smelled of rain and freshly cut grass. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with it, waiting until I reached my car before allowing the first tear to fall. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, watching guests through the windows. Laughing, drinking, celebrating. A family I had married into but never truly joined. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Where did you go? Mom said there was some mix-up with the list." I didn't respond. Instead, I started the car and drove toward the city, toward my office, where I was respected, valued, heard. The humiliation slowly transformed into something harder, colder, more resolute. This wasn't just about a birthday party. This was about 5 years of subtle exclusions, of being treated as temporary, of not being seen. As I merged onto the highway, I made a decision. I would no longer shrink myself to fit into spaces where I wasn't wanted. I would no longer pretend that the slights didn't sting, or that the exclusions didn't matter. Rain began falling again as I drove, washing away the remnants of my tears. By the time I reached the towering glass building where my office waited, I had composed myself. Rebecca, my assistant, looked surprised to see me on a Saturday. "I thought you had that family thing today," she said, rising from her desk. "Change of plans," I replied, removing my coat. "Let's get back to that Henderson proposal. I think I've figured out the angle we need." I immersed myself in work until evening, channeling my hurt into productivity. When I finally checked my phone again, there were 5 missed calls from James and a voicemail asking where I was, his voice hovering between concern and irritation. I would go home eventually, would face the inevitable conversation, the excuses, the promises that next time will be different. But for now, I allowed myself this small act of rebellion, choosing my own space over one where I was clearly unwelcome. As I gathered my things to leave, I caught my reflection in the window. Shoulders straight, eyes clear, composure regained. Eleanor's party continued without me, just as she'd wanted. But something had shifted inside me, something that wouldn't be easily reversed. I was done trying to earn a place at their table. The drive home from my office that evening became a journey through memories. 5 years of calculated slights and careful exclusions. 5 years of James saying, "They just need time," and "That's just how Mom is," as if time could cure prejudice, or as if her behavior deserved excuses. I met James at a charity gala in Boston. I was there representing my firm. He was there because his family always attended such events. Our connection was immediate. He was charming, intelligent, and refreshingly direct. We dated for 8 months before he proposed, and I said yes, without hesitation, imagining a life of partnership and possibility. The first hint of trouble came when I met Eleanor. She greeted me with a cool handshake and appraising eyes that took in my sensible shoes and department store dress. "James tells me you work in finance," she said, making it sound like a regrettable condition. "How industrious." The engagement party was held at the Marston summer home in Cape Cod, a sprawling colonial with private beach access. I arrived with James to find name cards at every place setting, elaborate floral arrangements, and waitstaff circulating with champagne. My name card was placed at the far end of the table, separated from James by his cousins, his ex-girlfriend Olivia, and a distant family friend. "It's just seating," James whispered when I pointed it out. "Don't read into it." But there was always something to read into. The Christmas where everyone received personalized stockings except me. The family portrait Eleanor commissioned with a space conspicuously left open in case you two don't work out. The family vacations planned during times she knew I couldn't get away from work. I tried at first. Brought homemade bread to Sunday. Dinners. Offered financial advice when Thomas mentioned investment troubles. Helped Melissa plan her baby shower. My efforts were met with polite thanks that never translated to genuine inclusion. "You don't have to try so hard," James would say after these gatherings, misreading my intentions. They'll come around. But they didn't come around. They simply became more sophisticated in their rejection. The watershed moment came during Thanksgiving dinner, 2 years into our marriage. Eleanor had placed me between Cousin Walter, who was profoundly deaf in one ear and refused to wear his hearing aid, and Aunt Judith, who had early onset dementia and repeated the same story about her cruise to Alaska every 10 minutes. I was effectively isolated despite being at a table of 20. During dessert, Eleanor asked each family member to share what they were thankful for. When it came to my turn, she smoothly skipped over me and moved to James. No one noticed, or, if they did, no one spoke up. That night, I confronted James for the first time. "Your mother deliberately excluded me today," I said as we undressed for bed. "You're being paranoid," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Mom's just old-fashioned. She doesn't mean anything by it." "She meant exactly what she did," I insisted. "And you let her. You've always let her." The argument escalated until James stormed out, spending the night at his parents' house, a retreat that confirmed everything I'd said. When he returned the next day, we established an uneasy truce. I would attend only major family functions, and he would stop pressuring me to make an effort with people who had no interest in making an effort with me. I redirected my energy toward my career. Finance had always been my passion. The elegant puzzle of numbers, the strategy of investment, the satisfaction of growth. I excelled as a wealth manager at Blackstone Group, building a reputation for creative solutions and steady returns. My client list grew, as did my confidence. 3 years into our marriage, I was approached by a former client who had started a boutique investment firm specializing in sustainable technologies. He offered me a partnership, a risk, but one with enormous potential. I accepted, drawing on my savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother to buy in. James was supportive in his way. "It's good you have something to focus on," he said, as if my career were a hobby to keep me occupied rather than the foundation of my identity. The firm grew steadily, then explosively. We caught the wave of interest in green investment, attracted clients disillusioned with traditional banking after the recession, and built a reputation for both integrity and results. Within 2 years, we had offices in Boston, New York, and Chicago. My name appeared in financial publications. I was invited to speak at conferences. Eleanor and her circle remained oblivious to my success, or pretended to be. At family gatherings, they still asked patronizing questions about that little company I worked for. When I mentioned a major client we'd secured, the conversation quickly shifted to Melissa's new landscaping project, or Thomas's golf tournament. The irony wasn't lost on me when we acquired the management of pension funds for several companies, including the one where Thomas served as vice president. He never made the connection, never realized that the quarterly reports he received bore my signature, or that the investment strategy he praised to his board was one I had personally developed. James and I settled into a marriage of separate spheres. He practiced corporate law at a firm his father had helped him join. I built my company. We maintained separate finances, separate friends, increasingly separate lives. We still cared for each other, still shared moments of genuine connection, but a gulf had formed between us, one lined with all the times he had chosen his family's comfort over my dignity. I became skilled at compartmentalizing. Business Sarah was confident, decisive, respected. Wife Sarah was accommodating, uncomplaining, invisible. The dissonance exhausted me, but I maintained the division out of habit, out of a stubborn belief that marriage required sacrifice, out of love for the man James was when we were alone. Our 5th anniversary passed quietly. We had dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, exchanged thoughtful gifts, made love with the familiarity of long-term partners. Neither of us mentioned the growing distance between us, or the fact that we'd stopped talking about having children. A dream deferred until some undefined future when things would somehow be different. The morning after Eleanor's birthday party, James came home looking tired and frustrated. He found me in the home office, reviewing quarterly projections. "You could have stayed," he said, leaning against the door frame. "Mom said it was just a misunderstanding with the guest list." I looked up from my laptop. It wasn't a misunderstanding, and we both know it. What was I supposed to do? Make a scene at her birthday? "You were supposed to stand up for your wife," I replied, my voice level. "But you never do you?" He sighed, rubbing his face. "Look, I'm caught in the middle. Here, Mom is set in her ways, and you've never really tried to understand our family traditions, our way of doing things." 5 years of swallowed responses rose in my throat. "Your family tradition is exclusion, James. Your way of doing things is making sure I know my place. I've understood that perfectly from the beginning." The conversation ended there, as they always did, without resolution, without change. James retreated to the living room to watch baseball. I returned to my projections, to the world where I had built something meaningful, something entirely my own. What neither of us acknowledged was that while Eleanor could exclude me from her birthday party, she couldn't erase the woman I had become when no one was watching. The morning after our argument about Eleanor's party, I made a decision that would change everything. Sitting at my kitchen island, coffee growing cold beside my laptop, I finalized the paperwork to launch my own investment firm. No partners, no compromise, just my vision, my name, my rules. I'd been planning it for months, quietly setting the foundations while continuing my work at the partnership. I had the capital, the client connections, and most importantly, the hunger to build something that was entirely mine. I called it Meridian Capital, a nod to my grandmother who'd taught me that true north was always within myself. When I told James over dinner that night, his fork paused midway to his mouth. "You're starting your own firm, now?" His emphasis on now carried unspoken questions. "Why didn't you discuss this? With me? How will this affect us? What about starting a family?" "I've been planning it for a while," I replied, watching his expression shift from surprise to something closer to concern. "The timing is right. The market's stabilizing, and I've secured commitments from enough clients to make it viable from day one." "That's impressive," he said finally, resuming his meal. "But risky." "Life is risk," I countered. "And this one is calculated." He didn't ask for details, didn't offer to help, didn't even toast my new venture. Just nodded and changed the subject to his upcoming golf weekend with his father and Thomas. The pattern of our marriage continued, parallel lives occasionally, intersecting but rarely merging. Launching Meridian consumed me completely. I leased office space in a renovated factory building in downtown Boston, all exposed brick, steel beams, and natural light. I hired selectively, Rebecca as my executive assistant, 2 analysts fresh from Harvard Business School hungry to prove themselves, a compliance officer with 20 years of experience, and a marketing director who understood my vision of quiet, authority rather than flashy promises. The first year was brutal. 18-hour days, sleepless nights, the constant pressure of knowing every decision rested on my shoulders alone. I missed dinners with James, declined Eleanor's obligatory holiday invitations, existed in a world of numbers, projections, and careful relationship building. Some nights I slept on the leather sofa in my office rather than making the drive home. James adapted to my absence with concerning ease. He filled his time with more family events, more golf weekends, more late nights at his firm. We became something like roommates who occasionally shared a bed. Civil, even affectionate at times, but increasingly disconnected. By the end of that first year, Meridian had not just survived, but thrived. We doubled our initial client base, hired 3 more staff members, and begun specializing in sectors I'd identified as undervalued: sustainable energy, women-led startups, and health technology. My approach wasn't revolutionary, but it was solid, ethical, and increasingly profitable. What gave me the greatest satisfaction wasn't the growth itself, but the culture I was building. Every Friday, we closed early for a team lunch, where everyone from the newest intern to me shared ideas. I mentored the young women on my staff, teaching them to navigate the male-dominated financial world without compromising their identities. We donated 5% of our profits to organizations supporting financial literacy for women and minorities. In our second year, we landed the Cambridge University Endowment Fund as a client, a coup that put us on the map nationally. The Boston Business Journal ran a profile on Meridian, describing it as the rare financial firm that balances aggressive returns with ethical investment practices. My photo accompanied the article: professional, confident, unsmiling. James left the magazine open on our kitchen counter, the article facing up. "Congratulations," he said when I found it. "Mom saw this, by the way. She was surprised." "I'm sure she was," I replied, unable to suppress a small smile. "Did she actually say my name?" He frowned. "Sarah, don't start. She asked if we were going to the Phillipses' annual summer party next month. Said it would be good for you to network." The irony was rich, Eleanor suddenly recognizing my career now that it had received public validation. "I'm afraid I'll be in New York that weekend. We're opening our 3rd office." I didn't tell him the whole truth, that Eleanor's social circle increasingly intersected with my professional one, that the wives of his father's golf buddies now called my office seeking investment advice, that Thomas's company had approached Meridian about managing their corporate pension fund. The worlds were colliding, but only I could see it happening. By our 3rd year, Meridian had grown to 30 employees across 3 offices. We managed over $800 million in assets, a figure that still sometimes left me breathless when I contemplated Nya. My name appeared on Forbes' list of financial professionals to watch, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences alongside people I'd once studied in business school. I hired Adam Bennett as our chief operating officer that year, quiet, brilliant man with a gift for organizational systems and a bone-deep integrity that matched my own. He'd left a prestigious position at Goldman Sachs, taking a slight pay cut to join us because, as he put it, "I want to work somewhere I can be proud of." Adam quickly became my right hand, streamlining our operations and freeing me to focus on strategy and client relationships. We worked well together, often staying late to tackle complex problems, our minds operating on complementary wavelengths. He never mentioned his personal connections, and I never thought to ask. In the world of Meridian, family backgrounds were irrelevant compared to competence and character. My success changed me in ways both subtle and profound. I carried myself differently, walked into rooms with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged there rather than someone fighting to prove her worth. I spoke less, but with more impact. I stopped apologizing before offering opinions. I learned the power of silence, of making others wait for my response. At home, these changes created a new tension with James. He'd fallen in love with a woman who deferred, who accommodated, who made herself smaller to fit his family's expectations. Now he lived with someone who had outgrown those constraints. "You're different," he said one night as we prepared for bed, watching me remove the simple pearl earrings that had become my signature look. "I'm the same," I corrected him. "I'm just not hiding anymore." Our 5th anniversary approached with neither of us quite knowing how to mark it. The traditional gift was wood, something strong but capable of being shaped. The irony wasn't lost on me. Our marriage had indeed been shaped, but not in ways either of us had anticipated. We settled on a weekend in Vermont, staying at a small luxury inn far from both our offices and his family. For 2 days, We hiked through autumn forests, ate at farm-to-table restaurants, and made careful love in our four-poster bed. We didn't discuss work or family or the growing distance between us. We simply existed in a bubble of remembered affection and mutual respect. On our last morning there, over breakfast on the inn's wraparound porch, James surprised me by asking about Meridian's future. "Where do you see it going?" he asked, buttering his toast with careful precision. 5 years. From now, I mean. I considered the question seriously. International expansion, offices in London and Singapore, 1,000 clients instead of 100, a foundation focusing on financial literacy. Maybe. I hesitated, then continued. Maybe an investment fund specifically targeting businesses owned by women and minorities. He nodded slowly. "You've really built something remarkable, Sarah." The compliment was genuine, his eyes warm with admiration that had been absent for too long. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who saw me clearly and valued what he saw. "Thank you," I said simply. "I wish my family could see what you've accomplished," he added, the moment fracturing slightly. I set down my coffee cup. "They could have seen it all along, James. They chose not to look." He didn't argue, just reached across the table to take my hand. We drove back to Boston that afternoon in comfortable silence, both perhaps wondering if this weekend had been a new beginning or a beautiful conclusion. The invitation to Eleanor's 60th birthday arrived 2 weeks later, engraved cardstock in a heavy cream envelope, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. James Walters. A formal affair at Hampshire Hall, the same venue where she'd humiliated me 5 years earlier. A full-circle moment, though she couldn't have known the significance. "We should go," James said when I showed him the invitation. "It's a milestone. Birthday." I studied his face, the hopeful expression, the desire for harmony that had always defined him. "All right," I agreed, surprising us both. "I'll be there." What neither of us could have predicted was how different this visit to Hampshire Hall would be, not because Eleanor had changed, but because I had. The woman who would walk through those doors was no longer seeking approval or inclusion. She had built her own table, and it was time everyone knew it. The day of Eleanor's 60th birthday arrived with unseasonable warmth for May in New England. I spent extra time getting ready, not out of anxiety, but precision. I chose a sleek, charcoal dress that whispered money rather than screamed it, paired with a simple strand of pearls and the diamond studs James had given me for our anniversary. Professional, elegant, appropriate, my armor for battle. "You look beautiful," James said as we drove to Hampshire Hall, his hands tight on the steering wheel. He'd been unusually quiet all morning, perhaps sensing that something had shifted in me. "Thank you," I replied, watching the familiar streets pass by. Last time I'd driven this route alone, humiliation burning in my chest. Today we arrived together, James parking his Audi between a Bentley and a Range Rover. "Ready?" he asked, reaching for my hand across the console. I nodded, surprised by the gesture. "As I'll ever be." Hampshire Hall looked exactly as it had 5 years ago. Imposing columns, manicured lawns, crystal chandeliers visible through tall windows. But I was not the same woman who had walked these steps before. We entered together, James's hand at the small of my back. The foyer bustled with caterers and early arrivals. Melissa spotted us. First, her face registering surprise before settling into her practiced society smile. "James, Sarah, you made it," she called, air-kissing my cheeks. "Mom's in the main hall overseeing the final touches. You know how she is about these things." "Perfectionist." "To the core," James agreed with a familiar eye roll. "Sarah, I've been meaning to call you," Melissa continued, lowering her voice. "Thomas mentioned your firm is handling the Westridge account now. That's quite impressive. The recognition, however calculated, was new. Yes, we took them on last quarter. They're an excellent fit for our portfolio. Well, we should catch up sometime. I've been thinking about some investments myself, now that the twins are in school. She flicked her perfect blonde hair over one shoulder. Maybe lunch next week? Before I could respond, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, regal in midnight blue, silk. Her eyes found James first, they always did, then slid to me with the briefest tightening of her lips. James, darling. And Sarah. How lovely. Her tone suggested it was anything but. The photographer wants family photos before everyone arrives. James, you'll be in the first group. The familiar exclusion tactic. I smiled thinly. I'll find a drink while you... Take care of that. James hesitated, looking between his mother and me. For once, he seemed to register the subtle dismissal. Sarah's family too, Mom. She should be in the photos. Eleanor's perfect mask slipped for just a second. Of course, but these are just the immediate family first. You, your sister, your father. Then we'll do extended family. Sarah is immediate family, James insisted, his voice firmer than I'd ever heard him use with his mother. She's my wife. A small victory, but still Eleanor prevailed. The photographer has a specific arrangement in mind. We'll include Sarah in the next round, of course. She swept away, James following after a backward glance that mingled apology with resignation. I made my way to the bar, ordering a gin and tonic. The bartender, a young man with kind eyes, added an extra lime wedge. Looked like you could use it, he said with a wink. I found a quiet corner to observe the room filling with Boston's upper crust, old money and understated jewelry, new money and designer labels. I recognized faces from charity boards, country, club events, and business functions. Some nodded in my direction. A few even approached with surprising warmth. Sarah Walters, said Margaret Cavendish, chairwoman of Boston Children's Hospital Board. I've been hoping to run into you. Your work with the financial literacy program has been remarkable. We chatted about the program I'd established to teach financial basics to young women aging out of foster care. Margaret seemed genuinely interested, not once mentioning James or his family. We should talk about expanding it, she suggested as we parted. I'll have my assistant call yours next week. The interaction left me bemused. 5 years ago, these same people had looked through me. Now they sought me out. Not because of my marriage, but because of what I'd built. Dinner was announced, and guests moved toward assigned tables. I checked the place cards, half expecting to find myself exiled to a distant corner. Instead, I was seated at table 3. Not at the family table, but close, between a judge and a state senator. The meal progressed pleasantly enough. The food was exquisite, the wine well paired. I made easy conversation with my table companions, discussing everything from the upcoming gubernatorial race to the revival of Boston's theater district. No one asked about James, or seemed surprised by my opinions. I existed as myself. After the main course, Eleanor rose for a speech. She thanked everyone for coming, reminisced about milestones, and asked various family members to stand for recognition. She did not mention me, though she nodded to James and his wife when acknowledging her children's presence. Dessert arrived, individual lemon soufflés with raspberry coulis. As coffee was being served, I excused myself to the ladies' room, needing a moment away from the practiced smiles and polite conversation. In the elegant powder room, I reapplied my lipstick and adjusted my pearls. The woman in the mirror looked composed, confident. I barely recognized her as the same person who had fled this venue in tears 5 years before. When I returned to the hall, something had changed. There was a tension in the air. Conversations, muted. As I approached my table, I noticed James standing rigidly near his mother, whose face had flushed an unbecoming shade of pink. Adam, my COO Adam, stood nearby, his tall frame unmistakable even from across the room. What was he doing? Here? I hadn't known he had any connection to this world. I moved closer, catching fragments of conversation. Completely inappropriate, Eleanor was saying, her voice carrying despite her attempt at discretion. I disagree, Mrs. Walters, Adam replied, his tone professionally civil but unyielding. What's inappropriate is how you've treated her. My steps faltered as I realized they were discussing me. I don't know what she's told you, but family matters are private, Eleanor hissed. She's told me nothing, Adam said. She's far too professional for that. But I've seen the way you speak to her, the way you've just excluded her from your acknowledgments, the way you seated her away from her husband, and I won't stand by silently. Eleanor drew herself up. And who exactly are you to comment on my family arrangements? I'm Adam Bennett, Chief Operating Officer at Meridian Capital, and Sarah Walters is not just my boss. She's the most respected financial mind I know, and one of the finest people I've had the privilege to work with. The room had grown quieter still, attention gravitating toward the confrontation. I should have been mortified, should have wanted to disappear. Instead, I felt strangely calm as I stepped forward. Adam, I said, my voice carrying in the silence. I didn't know you'd be here. He turned, genuine respect in his eyes. Sarah, I apologize for the scene. My grandmother is Judge Bennett. He gestured toward an elegant older woman watching the proceedings with interest. I didn't realize you were connected to the Walters family until I saw you arrive. Everything clicked into place. His Harvard education, his easy familiarity with Boston's elite, his understanding of the world I'd married into. He'd never mentioned it because at Meridian, family connections meant nothing compared to merit. No, apology necessary, I said, conscious of the eyes on us, though I'm surprised to see my Monday morning operations meeting has relocated to Hampshire Hall. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Adam smiled, then nodded respectfully to Eleanor. Mrs. Walters, congratulations on your birthday. My grandmother speaks highly of your work with the symphony board. With that perfect social grace, he stepped away, rejoining his grandmother's table. But the damage, or perhaps the healing, had been done. Eleanor stood speechless. James looked thunderstruck, and I felt something inside me settle into place. I returned to my seat as the string quartet began to play. The senator leaned over. Meridian Capital, he murmured. Impressive operation. You've built. My chief of staff has been singing your praises for months. Thank you, I replied, taking a sip of water. We're quite proud of our work. Across the room, Eleanor had recovered enough to accept birthday wishes from approaching guests. James caught my eye, his expression unreadable. And Adam Bennett sat beside his grandmother, seemingly unaffected by the scene he'd caused. The evening continued, but the dynamics had irrevocably shifted. In one unexpected moment, the carefully maintained fiction of my insignificance had been shattered, not by my own hand, but by someone who saw me clearly enough to speak the truth. The ride home from Eleanor's birthday was silent. James drove with mechanical precision, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw set in a way I'd rarely seen. I watched the streetlights flash across his face, illuminating then shadowing his features in rhythmic intervals. Neither of us seemed to know where to begin. He pulled into our driveway just after midnight, killing the engine, but making no move to exit the car. How long have you known Adam Bennett? He finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. 3 years, replied. I hired him from Goldman Sachs as my COO. And you never thought to mention that he's Judge Bennett's grandson? That his family has known mine for decades? I turned to face him fully. I didn't know until tonight. Adam never mentioned his family connections, and I never asked. At Meridian, we hire for talent, not pedigree. James laughed, a short, bitter sound. You really don't understand how Boston works, do you? Everyone knows everyone. The Bennetts have a wing named after them at Mass General. They've been on the Harvard Board of Overseers for generations. And that matters because, James exploded, then immediately composed himself. Because you've been building this narrative about being excluded because of your background, when clearly that's not the whole story. The accusation stung. What exactly are you implying, James? I'm not implying anything. I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, if you'd made more of an effort to understand our world instead of judging it, things might have been different. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. I made every effort, for years. I was polite at every dinner, showed up for every holiday, remembered every birthday, and was rewarded with being seated at the far end of tables, excluded from family photos, and most recently, turned away at the door of your mother's party. Don't you dare put this on me. He said nothing for a long moment, then reached for the door handle. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. I need to think. I watched him walk into our house, his shoulders slumped in a way that might once have tugged at my heart. Tonight, I felt only a curious detachment. I remained in the car, breathing in the leather scent, gathering my thoughts before following him inside. Instead of going upstairs, I went to my home office and powered up my laptop. There was an email from Adam, sent just an hour ago. Sarah, hope this finds you well after what became an unexpectedly charged evening. I want to apologize if my actions caused you any personal or professional discomfort. It was never my intention to create a scene, but I could not remain silent in the face of what I witnessed. Please know that my respect for you is based entirely on your professional accomplishments and personal integrity, not on any social connections or family relationships. The work we do at Meridian matters precisely because it stands on merit rather than privilege. If you wish to discuss this further, I'm available at your convenience. Respectfully, Adam. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading his words. In our 3 years of working together, Adam had never overstepped professional boundaries. His intervention tonight had come not from personal attachment, but from a sense of justice that aligned precisely with the values we'd built Meridian upon. I responded simply, Adam, no apology necessary. Your integrity is exactly why you're an essential part of Meridian. Thank you, Sarah. I closed my laptop and finally went upstairs. James was already asleep in the guest room or pretending to be. I changed into silk pajamas and slid between our sheets alone, wondering how many more nights would end this way. Morning brought a strange new reality. James left early for a breakfast meeting, avoiding the conversation we both knew was inevitable. I went into the office despite it being Saturday, finding comfort in Meridian's clean lines and purposeful energy. Rebecca looked surprised too. See me. Didn't expect you in today. Rough night? Interesting one, I replied, hanging my coat. Is there coffee? Fresh pot in the kitchen. Also, your phone's been blowing up. Melissa Walters has called twice, Judge Bennett's office once, and there's been 3 calls from numbers I don't recognize but definitely have 617 area codes. I paused. Melissa called here? Not my cell? Rebecca nodded. Said she didn't have your personal number. Wanted to schedule that lunch you discussed. The ripples from last night were spreading faster than I'd anticipated. I took my coffee into my office and closed the door, needing time to process before returning any calls. By Monday, the situation had evolved further. James and I maintained a careful politeness at home, discussing practical matters, but avoiding the deeper conversation we needed to have. At Meridian, I received a handwritten note from Judge Bennett expressing her delight at finally connecting the dots between me and her grandson, along with an invitation to join the board of her educational foundation. The most surprising development came Tuesday morning, when my assistant forwarded an email from Eleanor's personal secretary requesting a meeting to discuss potential philanthropic initiatives. No mention of our personal connection, no acknowledgement of what had transpired at her birthday. Just a business-like request as if we were strangers. I declined politely, citing a full schedule. Whatever game Eleanor was playing, I had no interest in participating. James finally broke our stalemate Wednesday evening, finding me in the garden where I was deadheading roses. A meditative activity I'd taken up when work stress became overwhelming. "My mother wants to have us over for dinner," he said without preamble. "Just us. No extended family." I continued snipping dried blooms. "And what did you tell her?" "That I'd discuss it with you." He sat on the stone bench beside my rose beds. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happens next." I set down my shears and removed my gardening gloves. "Yes, we do. I've been thinking about what Adam said at the party," he began, his voice careful, "about how we've treated you, how I've allowed you to be treated." And he wasn't wrong. The admission seemed to cost him something. I've been a coward. I've prioritized peace with my family over standing up for my wife. I told myself it was about respecting traditions or avoiding conflict. But really, it was cowardice. I sat beside him on the bench, maintaining a small distance between us. "Why now, James? What changed?" He looked out over the garden, the setting sun casting long shadows across our carefully tended lawn. "Seeing you through Adam's eyes, hearing how he spoke about you, with such genuine respect. It made me realize what I've been taking for granted." He turned to me. "And how much I've failed. You." The words I'd waited years to hear now landed with curious hollowness. "It shouldn't have taken another man's respect to make you see my worth." "I know," he said quietly. "That's part of what I've been grappling with." A hummingbird darted among my salvias, its wings a blur of movement. We watched it in silence before James spoke again. "I love you, Sarah. I always have. But I'm not sure that's enough anymore." The simple truth hung between us. I reached for his hand, the first intimate contact we'd had in days. "I love you, too, but you're right. It might not be enough." That night, we slept in the same bed again, not touching but no longer actively avoiding each other. A truce of sorts, though both of us recognized it as possibly temporary. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. I was preparing for an early conference call when the doorbell rang. James had already left for court, so I answered it myself, surprised to find Melissa standing on my porch, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I hope it's not too early," she said. "I was dropping the twins at soccer and thought I'd take a chance you might be home." I invited her in, curious despite my reservations. She perched awkwardly on the edge of our sofa, declining my offer of coffee. "I'll get right to it," she said, her usual social polish missing. "I owe you an apology. Several years' worth of apologies, actually." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "When James first brought you home, I thought, we all thought, you were just passing through, that you'd leave once you realized you didn't fit our world." She twisted her wedding ring. "Then when you stayed, I assumed you were. After his money, our connections, it was easier than admitting I might have misjudged you. And now?" I prompted when she paused. "Now I realize we've been the small-minded ones. What you've built with Meridian, it's extraordinary, and it's made me question what I've done with my own opportunities." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I've spent a decade planning charity galas and pretending that makes me significant. You've actually created something meaningful." Her vulnerability surprised me. The Melissa I knew never admitted weakness or error. "Why tell me this now?" "Because Adam Bennett was right, and because I've been thinking about what kind of example I'm setting for my daughters." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "I don't expect us to become best friends, but I would like the chance to know my sister-in-law. The real one, not the version we invented to justify our behavior." After she left, I sat in the quiet of my living room, absorbing the strange new landscape taking shape around me. One man's moment of principled honesty had created ripples affecting relationships built over years. Not because he had power or position in their world, but because truth spoken clearly carries its own authority. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Mom called. Wants to reschedule dinner for next week. Your call." I stared at the message, considering my response carefully. Whatever I decided would set a course for our future, both as a couple and as part of the extended Walters family. The choice was, finally, truly mine. And for the first time in our marriage, everyone knew it. 3 weeks after Eleanor's birthday party, Boston Magazine published their annual Power 50 list of the city's most influential figures. I was working late, reviewing quarterly projections, when Adam knocked on my office door. "Have you seen this?" he asked, holding out the glossy magazine. I shook my head, taking it from him. There on page 27 was my photograph. Not a formal headshot, but a candid taken at last month's Economic Forum. Beside it, a brief profile highlighting Meridian's growth and my work with financial literacy initiatives. Number 38 on their list, described as reshaping Boston's investment landscape with a commitment to both profit and purpose. "Congratulations," Adam said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Well-deserved recognition." I studied the page, feeling strangely disconnected from the woman described there. "Thank you," though I suspect being Judge Bennett's grandson might have helped bring me to their attention. He laughed, leaning against my doorframe. "Trust me, my grandmother has been trying to get me on that list for years. If family connections were enough, I'd have made it long ago." I closed the magazine. "Speaking of your grandmother, I had lunch with her yesterday. Remarkable woman. She said the same about you. Also mentioned you've agreed to join her foundation board." I nodded. "It's a worthy cause, providing legal education to first-generation college students." What I didn't mention was how comfortable I'd felt with Judge Bennett, how our conversation had flowed from education to politics to art without a single moment of condescension or judgment. She'd treated me as an intellectual equal, valuing my perspective even when we disagreed. It was a novel experience, being seen from my mind rather than measured against some unspoken social standard. "The summer gala is next month," Adam said. "Fair warning, my grandmother expects all board members to attend." "I'll be there," I replied, remembering I'd already received a formal invitation. It had arrived alongside one to the Cavendish Foundation dinner and another to a fundraiser at the Museum of Fine Arts, all addressed to me personally, not as Mrs. James Walters. Adam bid me good night, and I returned to my projections, but my mind kept drifting to the strange new reality taking shape around me. The very circles that had once excluded me now sought my presence. The irony wasn't lost on me. At home, things with James remained in a delicate state of transition. We'd declined Eleanor's dinner invitation, opting instead for a weekend away at a small inn in the Berkshires, where we'd talked more honestly than we had in years. "I want us to work," James had said, as we walked along a wooded trail. "But I don't think we can just go back to how things were." "I wouldn't want to," I'd replied. That version of us was built on compromise, mostly mine. He'd winced but nodded. "I know. I let my family dictate too much of our life because it was easier than standing up to them. easier than examining what I really wanted versus what was expected of me. And what do you want, James? Not what your parents want, not what your firm expects. You. He'd been silent for a long moment. I want a partnership, not a performance. I want to be proud of my wife's success instead of feeling threatened by it. I want to find my own path, even if it's different from what the Walters men have always done. I'd taken his hand then. Those sound like good places to start. We'd returned to Boston with no grand declarations, no dramatic solutions, just a cautious commitment to building something more authentic between us. It would take time, we both knew. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. In the meantime, I focused on Meridian's continued growth and my expanding role in Boston's business community. The offers to join boards, speak at events, and mentor young professionals multiplied weekly. I accepted selectively, prioritizing organizations aligned with my values, rather than those that simply offered prestige. The Walters family adjusted to the new dynamic with varying degrees of grace. Thomas approached me at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, awkwardly acknowledging that his company's pension fund had outperformed expectations under Meridian's management. Cousins and aunts who had once looked through me suddenly remembered my name, asked about my work, included me in conversations at family gatherings. Eleanor maintained a careful distance, no more overt hostility, but no warm overtures either. She sent a formal note congratulating me on the Boston Magazine recognition, the gesture of a society matron acknowledging a rising star rather than a mother-in-law reaching out to her daughter-in-law. I responded with equal formality, the unspoken boundaries between us now defined by mutual respect rather than her disdain. 6 weeks after the birthday party confrontation, the annual Walters family reunion was scheduled at their summer compound on Cape Cod. James and I had attended every year of our marriage, though my experiences there had rarely been pleasant. I'd been seated at children's tables, assigned to kitchen duty with the hired help, excluded from family photographs and traditions. "We don't have to go," James offered as the date approached. "We could take that trip to Montreal we've been talking about instead." I considered the option, tempted by the easy escape. "No," I decided finally. "I think we should go, but on our terms this time." We arrived at the Cape House on Friday evening, later than most guests due to a client meeting. I'd prioritized. The sprawling, shingled mansion overlooked the Atlantic, its wraparound porches and multiple wings designed to accommodate the extended Walters clan and their various hangers-on. As we pulled into the long driveway, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the body's memory of past humiliations. James reached across the console, squeezing my hand. "Remember, we leave the moment you want to. No questions asked." Inside, the house buzzed with familiar activity. Voices called from room to room. Ice clinked in cocktail glasses. Children raced up and down the central staircase while harried parents pretended not to notice. James's father spotted us first, crossing the foyer with surprising speed. "There." "You are," he boomed, clapping James on the shoulder before turning to me. "Sarah, good to see you. Congratulations on the Boston Magazine piece. Proud to have a Power 50 member in the family." The warmth seemed genuine, if somewhat calculated. William Walters had always been a political creature, adept at aligning himself with rising influence. Still, I accepted his handshake with grace. "Thank you, William. It was an unexpected honor." He guided us toward the main living room where most of the adults had gathered. "You're just in time. We're sorting out the weekend activities. Eleanor has the usual charts prepared." The living room fell silent as we entered, 30 pairs of eyes turning our way. Eleanor stood near the fireplace, clipboard in hand. Some things never changed. She nodded in acknowledgement. "James, Sarah, we've put you in the Blue Room this year." The Blue Room, one of the main bedrooms in the central part of the house, not the converted storage space in the East Wing where we'd been relegated in previous years. A small but significant adjustment in the family hierarchy. "Thank you," I said simply. The evening progressed with surprising ease. I made no special effort to ingratiate myself, neither apologizing for my late arrival, nor overcompensating with excessive friendliness. I simply existed in the space as my authentic self, engaged when conversations interested me, politely distant when they didn't. At dinner, I found my place card at the main table, seated between James's father and his Uncle George, a federal judge with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. The conversation ranged from recent Supreme Court decisions to the Red Sox's pitching rotation to the merits of various boarding schools for Melissa's twins. "What do you think, Sarah?" George asked when the topic turned to financial education in schools. "Worth the curriculum time, or better left to parents?" All eyes turned to me. In previous years, such direct questions about my professional expertise had been rare. "I think financial literacy is as fundamental as reading or mathematics," I replied. "We're sending children into a complex economic world without basic tools to navigate it. The data shows that early education in these concepts significantly reduces predatory debt and increases long-term financial stability, particularly for lower-income students." George nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. Perhaps your foundation could develop a model curriculum, something schools could actually implement?" "We're working on exactly that," I said, surprised he knew about Meridian's educational foundation. "Pilot program launches in Boston public schools this fall." The conversation continued, with others at the table building on my comments rather than dismissing them. I caught James watching me, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was what partnership could look like, each of us valued for our distinct contributions, neither diminished by the other's strength. After dinner, as people scattered to various activities, Eleanor approached me on the porch where I'd stepped out for a moment of quiet. "The Garden Club is having its annual fundraiser next month," she said without preamble. "I'm on the committee. We're looking for speakers who might draw a younger crowd." I turned to face her fully. "Are you asking me to speak, Eleanor?" She met my eyes directly, perhaps for the first time in our relationship. "Yes, about women, in finance or financial independence, whatever topic you think appropriate." I considered the request, recognizing it for what it was, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement. A small opening in a wall built over years. "I'd be happy to," I said finally. "Send the details to my office and Rebecca will put it on my calendar." She nodded briskly. "Good. That's settled then." She turned to go, then paused. "The blue dress you wore to the Economic Forum, the one in your magazine photo, it was quite suitable, sophisticated without being showy." From Eleanor, this constituted effusive praise. "Thank you," I replied, suppressing a smile. "It's one of my favorites." Later that night, as James and I prepared for bed in the blue room with its views of the ocean, he wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked, his breath warm against my ear. I watched the moonlight shimmer on the water beyond our window. "I'm not naive enough to think everything's magically fixed. Your mother hasn't suddenly become a different person. Neither have the others. But I'm no longer measuring myself by their approval. I'm taking up space without apology. And it seems to be changing the dynamic more than any amount of trying to fit in ever did." He turned me to face him. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what was happening. To stand up for you, for us." I touched his face gently. "We both have regrets, James. The question is where we go from here." The next morning, breakfast was served buffet style on the main porch. I filled my plate and looked for a place to sit among the scattered tables. Melissa caught my eye, waving me over to where she sat with her twins and a few cousins. "We were just talking about your financial literacy program," she said as I joined them. Sophie's school might be interested in participating. Her daughter, a serious 10-year-old with her mother's blonde hair and her father's thoughtful eyes, looked up from her pancakes. "Mom says you teach kids about money, so they don't make dumb mistakes when they grow up." I laughed, surprised by the accurate if blunt assessment. "That's exactly right, Sophie. What would you want to learn about money?" As Sophie launched into surprisingly insightful questions about allowances and saving, I caught sight of Eleanor watching our interaction from across the porch. Her expression was unreadable, but she didn't look away when our eyes met. Instead, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before returning to her conversation with William. No grand reconciliation, no dramatic apologies or tearful embraces. Just a quiet acknowledgement of a new reality. One where I had built my own seat, at the table, one that could no longer be taken away. James appeared with coffee refills, sliding into the chair beside me. Under the table, his hand found mine, our fingers interlacing with familiar ease. We had work still to do on our marriage, boundaries to establish with his family, old patterns to break and new ones to create. But for now, in the clear light of a Cape Cod morning, surrounded by the family that had once rejected me, I felt neither triumph nor bitterness, just a calm certainty in my own worth that no one else's opinion could shake.